Elias Ward yanked the reins when he saw a body collapsed in the red dust. It was a tall Apache woman, her muscular frame covered in dust and dried blood. Purple welts from a whip marked her shoulders and back, and her wrists were still bound with a strip of leather clear signs she had been tied up. Her breathing was shallow, and her chest rose and fell in faint, uneven motions. Elias leapt from his saddle and dropped to his knees beside her. Heat radiated off the ground in shimmering waves, but colder still was the thought that flashed through his mind. This could be a trap. The Apache tribe had warned him more than once not to meddle in their affairs. He placed his hand on her neck. Her pulse was so faint it felt like it might vanish at any second. If he left her here, the sun would kill her within a few hours. Gritting his teeth, Elias drew the knife from his belt and sliced through the leather binding. Then he hoisted her over his shoulder. She was heavy, like carrying a whole sack of grain, but he powered through and threw her across the horse's back. "Damn it," he muttered, kicking the reins. The horse bolted forward, red dust swirling in its wake. The scent of blood, sweat, and hot sand mixed in the air. Elias did not look back. If anyone was watching, they would know whose side he had chosen, and this time, there would be no turning back. Elias Ward galloped through the rickety wooden gate, rushing Takina inside the cabin. He gently lowered her down, laying her on an old blanket spread beside the fireplace, then hurried to start a fire. Flickering yellow light danced across his sun-darkened, sweat-soaked face. He dragged over the wooden bucket and scooped what little water remained in the tank. Every sip of water during the dry season was worth its weight in gold, but Elias soaked a cloth and used it to wipe the dust and dried blood from her face. The pulse at her wrist was still faint, but at least she was alive. Elias had never been one to get tangled in other people's problems. A few years back, disease swept through this land and took his wife and 2 young sons. Since then, he had lived like a ghost, tending only to the parched land and his small herd of cattle. He stayed away from town, and even farther away from the trouble that came with other people. But what he had done tonight shattered all of that. The woman before him, Takina, was unlike the Apache women he had seen before. Her body was powerful, with bulging arms and broad shoulders like a warrior. The whip marks on her back told of a brutal punishment, likely for betraying tribal law. Elias knew one thing for certain. If the tribe found out he had taken her in, they would brand him an enemy. Outside, night was falling fast. Prairie winds swept sand through the cracks in the cabin walls, carrying with them the lingering heat of the day. Elias threw more wood into the fire and dropped down beside Takina. The flames lit up his face, weathered, sun-scorched, with gray eyes that were cold but deep. He handed her the last bit of water in a small bowl. She parted her lips slightly, drank slowly, and then slipped into unconsciousness. Elias let out a heavy breath and pulled the rifle close, resting it within arm's reach. He leaned back against the wooden wall, eyes fixed on the door. He knew exactly what kind of people would leave a woman to die in the desert, and that they might return to finish what they started. And tonight, if they did, Elias Ward would be the one standing in the doorway. The fire in the hearth had faded, leaving only a bed of glowing embers. Elias dozed in his chair, the rifle resting across his lap. A faint rustling sound snapped him awake. "Takina." She pushed herself upright, her dark eyes wide and wild with panic. In an instant, her large hand snatched the small knife from beside the stove. Steel flashed in the firelight. Elias did not move. He slowly raised both hands, his voice low and gravelly. "If you are going to stab me, do it clean. But if you want to live, put the knife down." Takina was panting, sweat beading on her forehead. Her eyes darted around the cabin, small, old, but not a prison. Then, to the man in front of her, tall, lean, unshaven, with eyes that were steady and cold, she hesitated. Elias kept his voice calm. "I cut your bonds. If you want to leave, that door is open. But out there is nothing but hot sand and vultures." The knife trembled in her grip. After a long pause, she let out a breath and dropped it to the floor. Her powerful body collapsed like a felled tree. Elias stepped forward, picked up the blade, and handed her the last bowl of water. "Drink. You need it more than I do." Takina took the bowl and drank in slow sips, her eyes never leaving Elias, as if trying to figure out if this was some kind of trap. Without another word, Elias stepped out onto the porch and sat on the edge of the steps, his rifle across his lap. Takina tilted her head, watching through the door. In the moonlight, the man's silhouette remained still as stone, the only movement the faint wisps of smoke curling from his cigarette. That entire night, Takina did not sleep. Each time the nightmares came, she opened her eyes and saw Elias still there, never coming in, but never leaving either. A strange feeling began to stir in her chest, something she thought had died with her past. A sense of safety. By the time the sky began to pale, Elias had not moved. He simply turned his head and spoke quietly. "If you want to stay, until you are strong again, you can. If you want to leave, I will not stop you. The choice is yours." Takina stared at him, then turned her face away. She said nothing, but her hand tightened around the blanket draped over her shoulders. And that was her answer. The sun rose, casting its light down on the weathered roof of the cabin. Takina could stand on her own now. She stepped out into the yard, her shoulder still roughly bandaged, but her gaze sharp and focused. Elias was fixing a broken section of fence, not bothering to look up. "You are stronger," he said in an even tone. "If you want to eat, there is a spot to haul water behind the cattle pen." Takina said nothing, but a moment later, she picked up a wooden bucket and made her way to the water tank. Her thick, muscular arms flexed beneath sun-darkened skin as she pulled up the bucket. Elias glanced over someone who had nearly died just the night before and was already strong enough to work. It caught him by surprise. That day, Takina said almost nothing, simply followed Elias in silence, watching how he patched the fence and mixed mud to repair the walls. As the afternoon faded and Elias finally paused to rest, she suddenly stepped forward, picked up the hammer, and finished driving in the last posts. Elias stood still for a moment, then gave a quiet nod and let her carry on. That evening, for the first time, Takina lit the kitchen fire without being asked. She cooked a simple rabbit stew and set it down in front of Elias without a word. He looked at the bowl, then at her. A silent nod was all the thanks he gave. In the days that followed, the cabin was no longer so quiet. The sound of hammers, shovels, and wood clashing together filled the air. Elias dug a new water hole. Takina hauled stones to block the wind. Her strength so great, she rebuilt an entire section of the fence in just one afternoon. One evening, as the sunlight faded, the two of them sat on the front porch. Elias lit a cigarette, and Takina whittled a small knife. For the first time, she spoke. "Why did you save me?" Elias stared out at the cracked, dry fields. "Because I could not bear to see someone left out there. I have seen too much death." Takina was silent. After a moment, she nodded. A simple answer, but something inside her seemed to uncoil and loosen. That night, as the wind rustled through the old roof, Takina no longer tossed and turned. For the first time in months, she slept deeply. While outside the cabin, Elias's slow, steady footsteps circled the homestead. Thank you for being here. If this story reminded you of days gone by dusty sunsets and the echo of hooves pounding in your heart, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, so that each day we can sit together once more. And I will tell you another story from the Wild West. That afternoon, the sky suddenly turned a harsh, golden hue. Elias was tightening the reins on his old horse when the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. His head snapped up. On the horizon, a faint trail of dust was growing larger. "Uninvited guests," Elias muttered, grabbing the Winchester propped up on the porch. Takina heard the sound and stepped outside. The moment she saw the riders, she froze. 3 Apache warriors on horseback blocked the entrance to the ranch. Their faces were painted for war, their eyes cold as ice. The one in front nudged his horse forward and spoke in a deep, flat voice. "Our woman is here. Hand her over." Takina took a step back, her hand instinctively gripping the small knife at her side. Elias stepped forward, placing himself between the cabin door and the riders, the rifle steady in his hands. "She is injured. She has the right to stay here until she is healed." Another warrior snarled, his voice rising. "She has been cast out by the tribe.